We've all had times in our life when things aren't going as expected, maybe not even going well, and then someone comes up and demands more of us. When I was, 6 or 7, my older brother James, who you'll hear about in the future, we were both kind of jokesters, decided it was a good idea to tie his younger brother to a tree. And James, in his infinite wisdom, used 4 knots. And he realized that after his little brother, me, tried to struggle and push against it, the knots became tighter. And eventually, neither James nor Matthew could get the knots undone. So we had to finally come to that place that we had to do the most atrocious thing possible. Go tell Mom. So as I'm strapped to the tree, James runs off to tell Mom. But then he runs back without Mom. And he tells me, when Mom comes, tell her this was your idea. Suffice to say, eventually I was loose, and I did get revenge on my brother, which I shouldn't have done. Luckily, James and I have continued to do things to each other and forgive each other over the years. And there are times that we still kind of go, hey, you remember that time you did this to me? But in general, he is my brother, and I love him dearly. And it's easy for me to love him because I like him. He's my family. He makes me angry at times, but he is family. And it's natural to love him. But it's often harder to work with those who annoy us or hurt us, who aren't just our older brothers, with our enemies, with our adversaries, with our bosses at work, or officials on the other end of the phone call. This familiar passage is full of very hard statements by Christ. Turn the other cheek. Love your enemies. Do not resist an evil person. And even, get this, be perfect. Now, how can I do these things? Any of them, let alone be perfect. How hard is it to even do the first one? To turn the other cheek when someone slaps you? Let's be honest, friends, the world tells us something very different than Christ's instructions. The world tells us that it is weak to let someone hit you. So that if someone hits us, we are supposed to hit back. And hit back with interest. Right? Yet, is that the way we want to live? Think about it. Whether it's down here with the kids just playfully slapping back and forth, or even in our worlds that we know around us. How many times have we seen people retaliate back and forth? I think the best example of this is whenever there is an election pending, and you watch the two candidates start to sling each other with mud and dirt. And the funny thing is that when they start to retaliate back and forth, no one comes smelling like roses. Everybody leaves with a black eye, and everybody looks worse because of it. Is that the world we want to live in? A dirty, nasty world full of bruises from each other's punches? I remember I once heard a father remark to his son who was crying on a playground because there was a sandbox disagreement between 2 toddlers over a toy, that if another boy hit him, he was supposed to hit that child back twice as hard. Now, what's a child to do? Of course they're going to listen to dad. As I said, the world's wisdom holds that it is weak to turn the other cheek. We are told that it will somehow encourage bullies if we do that. And it will let bad people, whoever that is, get away with bad actions. And somewhere that makes sense to us. Somewhere we do want to punish bad behavior because we aren't supposed to let bad things happen. So it feels justified, almost right to punch back. But still, Christ's teaching is so very clear. Turn the other cheek. And I hate to tell you this, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of extra wiggle room here. He doesn't say you get to ignore this if it's Tuesday morning, or if it's somehow someone you've never met before, then you get to punch them. No. He says across the board, turn the other cheek. So what are we to do? What are we supposed to do when the going isn't easy? When we are frustrated, when someone is poking at us and we want to retaliate. We want to get back at them. We want to get our pound of flesh. Get this. According to Christ, when things are piling up, we're supposed to be willing to take more. That's kind of odd, isn't it? When we feel like we have had too much, we're supposed to ask for more. As he says, you have heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if someone wants to sue you and take your cloak, give him your cloak as well. If someone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. So what are we supposed to do when our culture tells us to do one thing and our faith tells us to do something else entirely different? We are to try. There will be times we will do a good job of this, and there's going to be times we'll do a bad one. I know in my life I've done both, but I still try. I try to learn to turn the other cheek. I try to learn to go over and offer the extra mile. For this does not make doormats. This is not making us weak Christians. Do we really believe that it is weak to turn the other cheek? To stand there in the face of opposition and to say, let's try this again? The weak thing would be to run away, wouldn't it? That would be weak. And even to hit back is kind of weak, because that's bestial. Any animal will bite that's poked. But we're called to be human and disciples. So to turn the other cheek, well, it takes considerable self-control and more than a little courage to stand up and say, here I am again. Let's try this anew. Now, truth be told, most of us today don't have to worry about being slapped. But I'm going to hazard a guess that very, very many of us do feel at times insulted or neglected. And thinking about these experiences are great times for us to think about how we respond. How do we respond to an insult rather than a true slap? Now, before we go forward, it's important to say that there are those people who do have to worry about being hit. Those who are concerned with being slapped, who are victims of domestic violence, this is not who Christ is talking to. Those are people who need help. But for the rest of us, this teaching was less about violence and more about revenge and self-pride. This is part of the reason we are told not to hit back. Rightly, we think the aggressor needs to be stopped. Otherwise, he might think he can get away with it. But experience tells us over and over again that retaliation tends to escalate. Have we not even seen that in our own church? That one insult retaliated against tends to breed another insult, another again, and another again, until we are all blind and toothless. When each of us strikes back with a harder physical or verbal blow, each of us becomes the victim, and each of us becomes the aggressor. If we allow ourselves to escalate every situation with each insult we receive, if we stress out over each slight, we will be living in an increasingly bitter world, and ultimately a place that we will hurt ourselves in. So friends, Christ tells us, do not resist someone who does harm to you. If someone hurts our feelings or wounds our pride, do not let us become bitter. Do not let ourselves be concerned with how we're going to get even. Let us concern ourselves with saying, let's try again. Let's not let the previous jabs be our definition. Let us say, here is the other cheek. We are not being encouraged to be doormats, but rather to start something new. An eye for an eye has not helped the world yet. It's not helped our church. So let's try something new. Let's try forgiving slights and embarrassments and see what happens when we follow the will of God. Amen.